Okay, are you ready for the second half of Chapter 10, The Ice Cream Man? Where we left off is Mr. Stout was saying, thanks for choosing not to erase my memory. Now let's see what they're going to do to try to figure out what Mrs. White is up to and see if Mr. Stout is who he says he is, or is he like Mrs. White says he is. All right, are you ready? We know she is here looking for a treasure, Pigeon said. We know she wants it because it will increase her powers. She says you are looking for it as well. She somehow knows a lot about what is going on in town. We're not sure why she involves kids in her work, or whether she really is as dangerous as we worry she might be. Mr. Stout folded his arms. I appreciate you laying your cards on the table, he said. I will try to be equally forthright. Mrs. White is more treacherous than you can guess. We are both magicians, but she has one of the most notorious and bloody histories of any member of our order. She craves power and has never hesitated to lie, cheat, steal, or kill to get it. Are you dangerous too? Pigeon asked. Mr. Stout shifted in his chair. I can be, I suppose. No magician is really safe, to himself or to others. Many of us are hermits who mostly want to be left alone as we pursue our studies. Some have altruistic intentions, others are entirely selfish. We all generally try to maintain a low profile. A few of us take on the responsibility of policing those who attempt to blatantly use magic for sinister ends, or who operate too openly and risk revealing the long guarded secrets of our existence. Are you one of the policemen? Nate asked. In limited capacity, yes, Mr. Stout said. However, I am not one of those who dedicate all their time to such matters. Belinda concerns me. I am aware of the treasure she is seeking. It is part of the reason I took up residence in this town years ago. What is the treasure? Summer asked. Mr. Stout stroked his furry length of his beard. None know for certain. We have only rumors. Supposedly, it is a talisman of significant magical powers, worthy of remaining concealed these long centuries. I came here as a guardian rather than a treasure seeker. I did not want Belinda or others of her mindset to lay hands on an item of such terrible power. But now I fear the only way to stop her and those like her is to locate the treasure myself. And what would stop you from using it for bad purposes? Summer asked. Mrs. White makes the same claim about you as you make about her. No magician would trust another with a talisman such as this, Mr. Stout acknowledged, least of all Belinda White. But I have lived quietly for hundreds of years. In bygone days, I have inhabited seats of power and prestige, and such honors long ago lost its savor. I have lived in Colson for years, not searching for the treasure, but delivering ice cream to school children in a rundown truck. I would gladly leave the hidden treasure away if Belinda were not hot on the trail. If I gained the treasure, I would store it and protect it from others who might abuse it. I don't get why Mrs. White involves us, Pigeon said. That has much to do with the nature of the magic we practice, as it does with her greed, Mrs. Stout said. You see, magicians function much more potently on the young. I'm sorry. You see, magic functions more potently on the young. Part of the paradox of becoming a magician is that by the time you know enough to manipulate magic, you are too old to use it to your full advantage. Mrs. White can engineer sweets that grant great powers to the young, but those same marvelous confections would have very little effect were she to use them herself. Why not use magic to make yourself younger? Pigeon asked. Mr. Stout spread his hands. We do what we can. Taking away years from a person is nearly impossible. Adding them is much easier. As magicians, about the best we can do is to try to maintain our current age. We can't quite stop the aging process, but we can slow it considerably. That is how magicians like Belinda and myself survived for so many years. So Mrs. White just wanted us to for our youth because her candy would work well on us, Nate restated. Basically, yes. Mr. Stout said, undoubtedly she believes that you four were especially bright and capable. She must have been monitoring your achievements. She would not have entrusted you with an assignment like erasing my memory unless she truly believed in your abilities. But make no mistake about it, you were being used. What should we do? Trevor asked. Mrs. Stout Mr. Stout rose and began pacing. This is a question of the hour. By coming to me and disclosing your assignment, you have placed yourself in extreme jeopardy. If Belinda learns you have betrayed her, your very lives could be in peril. As I see it, you have three options. You could pretend that your attempt to erase my memory failed and continue working for her. You could resign from her services immediately, never speak of any of this to anyone, and hope for the best, or you could try to beat her at her own game and get the treasure ahead of her. Any of those choices is risky. Pigeon and I resigned yesterday when she started explaining this assignment, Summer said. We're mainly here for moral support, Pigeon added. Trevor and I were only staying with her in order to figure out what she's up to, Nate said. We don't want to keep helping her. I want to beat her to the treasure, Trevor said. Is that realistic? Summer asked. It depends, Mr. Stout said, pacing with his hands behind his back. How much do you know? We helped her steal a pocket watch that belonged to her ancestor Hanover Mills, Nate said. One side of Mr. Stout's mouth curved up into a half smile. She said Hanover Mill was her ancestor? Belinda White was making magical candy when Hanover Mills was in diapers. Supposedly, the watch contained a clue revealing that an important object was buried with Hanover Mills, Pigeon said. The clue indicated that Hanover Mills was actually buried under a grave marker of Margaret Spencer, who died the same year. We dug up the grave and found a telescope. Mr. Stout stopped pacing and faced Pigeon. Telescope? Where is it now? She has it, Summer says. Mr. Stout shook his head slowly, wearing his lopsided grin again. He fingered the telescope on top of one of the pedestals. Do you know what this is? He said. A telescope? Nature ventured. I collect them, Mr. Stout said. Artists create high-end telescopes that sell for thousands of dollars. Those in this room function almost like kaleidoscopes, in that the telescope is locked into a fixed position aimed at a certain target. This telescope points at a stone ball with water trickling over it. The ball slowly turns, and the flowing water ensures that the pattern the telescope observed is never quite the same twice. Feel free to look. As the kids took turns gazing into the eyepiece and turning the wheel to rearrange the pattern, Mr. Stout crossed to a different telescope, switching on a light behind it. For this telescope, you dip this hoop into this soapy solution. He pulled a lever that immersed a circle of wire into a shallow reservoir. When he raised it, the hoop had a glossy film stretched across it, as if for blowing a huge bubble. Take a look, he offered. Nate peered into the telescope and, and beheld a brightly uh, animated pattern. Twisting the end of the telescope, he made the pattern dance. It looks like a cartoon, he said. Just the soapy film with the light behind it, Mr. Stout affirmed. Nate stole one more peek before allowing the others a turn. They had to dip the wire hoop again each time the film broke. Come with me, Mr. Stout said. He led them down a hall to a bedroom dominated big by a big four-poster connected with canopy and curtains. On the nightstand sat a small platform fashioned out of pink granite with a single vacant mount vacant mounting for a telescope. Trevor, Summer, Pigeon, and Nate gathered around it. This base was designed and built by Hanover Mills, Mr. Stout said. He left it to me in his will. He was not a relative, but we were friends. A telescope is meant to point at this surface. He indicated a smooth surface speckled with flecks opposite the empty mounting. Hanover told me that the right telescope would reveal a message hidden in the stone. You think we found the telescope? Pigeon said. It was it was this base that instigated my telescope collection, Mr. Stout said. After inheriting the platform, I tracked down several telescopes attributed to Hanover Mills. None revealed a message. I also experimented with telescopes made by various random craftsmen, hoping to get lucky. Again, success eluded me. I suspect Mrs. White now possesses the telescope I have been seeking all these years, a vital clue to locating the treasure. I have kept this base a closely guarded secret, but perhaps she somehow learned of it. That might explain why she would want my mind erased. She didn't mention anything about the base to us, Nate said, but that doesn't mean you're wrong. How does she know so much? Trevor asked. Does she sneak around at night? I see that Belinda has not explained much about herself, Mr. Stout chuckled. A magician cannot leave his or her lair. The lair is empowered with magical defenses and spells that keep them safe and postpone their aging. If Belinda abandoned her lair to snoop around, she would become a pile of bones in no time. But what about the ice cream truck? Pigeon said. Part of my lair, Mr. Stout said. Although making a vehicle part of my lair creates certain vulnerabilities to me, the added mobility justifies the risk. Magicians can journey from lair to lair, setting up new abodes as needed, traveling in temporary lairs, but a price of the lives we lead is that we surrender the ability to move about freely. You're saying Mrs. White lives at Sweet Tooth? Pigeon asked. Assuredly, Mr. Stout said. Then how does she know so much? Trevor asked again. Belinda has always employed henchmen, Mr. Stout said. Most of us also have a trick or two that allow us to personally spy on the outside world, which is why I worry about you kids. There is no way to be sure that Belinda is looking or when. You must be most cautious. What are the chances of us stealing the telescope from Mrs. White? Nate asked. Mr. Stout frowned. It would be very difficult. Her lair will be well guarded by spells. What if we use the mirror mints against her? Nate suggested. Mr. Stout's eyebrows knit together. I'm sure she keeps no mirrors in her lair large enough for anyone to gain access that way, since she is aware that the secret of mirrors travel endures. What if we planted a mirror inside the candy shop? Nate proposed. Mr. Stout scratched his hairy cheek. Possibly, he said, eyes lost in thought. If I could get my hands on that telescope, we just might beat her to the treasure. Once we acquire the treasure, we'll start preparing to leave town the next day. She'll have no more interest in Colson, California, and if she tries anything foolish out of spite, I would have the means to protect you. Maybe we should go for it, Trevor said. Yeah, Nate said. I'd rather take action than wait around for her to punish us. I can't advise you to try this, Mr. Scott said. It is too bold. But if you insist on taking the risk, your advantage would come from the fact that Belinda probably thinks her candy shop is invulnerable. Our lairs are designed to keep intruders out. If you can discover a way in, you may not find any obstacles between you and your goal. She probably just helps keeps it stashed under she probably just keeps it stashed under that table in her workshop, Trevor said. On the outside chance you were daring enough to attempt such an inadvisable mission, you would probably need to you were supposed to be wiped my memory, Mr. Scott said. When you fail to complete that mission, her guard will be up. Good point, Nate said. Mr. Stout put his hands behind his back and stood up straight. Of course, this could be an elaborate ruse by Belinda to ferret out what I know. If it is, well done. You utterly fooled me. I have laid my cards on the table. Please keep this information private. There are many others besides Belinda White who would try to destroy me simply to lay their hands on the telescope base. He rubbed the pink marble platform. We won't blab, Summer said. Having heard your news, I should eliminate all mirrors from my home, Mr. Stout said. Whether she has been peeking through windows or having spies use mirror travel, Belinda will probably notice if I do that. So I will wait for a few days while you figure things out. Would you like my telephone number? Yes, Nate said. Mr. Stout opened a drawer and withdrew 4 business cards, handing one to each of the kids. His address and telephone number were on one side. The other side said, Sebastian Scott, the Candy Wagon, homemade and brand names, ice cream, frozen treats, and candy. There it is. That's what his card looks like. Nate pocketed his card as Mr. Stout led them towards the front door. Feel free to contact me if you need anything, he said. He opened the door. Thank you, Mr. Stout, Pigeon said. Thank you again for the warning, Mr. Stout said. I'm quite fond of my identity. They filed out the door. Nate exited last. You'll hear from us again, Nate promised. Mr. Scott winked. I hope so. All right. The next chapter in the Candy Shop Wars is called Chapter 11, The Mirror Mints. I don't think I would go into the reflection world. All right. Bye-bye.